Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Wars Rebels Season 1. This video is part of a series of videos where I will attempt to review every episode of Star Wars Rebels, one season at a time. In this video, I will cover all the episodes of Season 1 of Star Wars Rebels. So, I have just finished watching the Clone Wars and doing my coverage of all 7 seasons of the Clone Wars. So now I am moving on to Rebels. I have not seen the show before, so it's my first time watching it as I cover it. Pretty much the same thing I did for Clone Wars. And so, now I'm on to Rebels. Now, I've heard that the first 2 seasons of the show are not very good. But I gotta say, I liked it better than the first couple seasons of Clone Wars. Part of the reason is I'm more pumped after watching Clone Wars for watching another Star Wars show than I was when I first went into Clone Wars. When I first went into it, I was kind of trepidatious and kind of unsure about it. Secondly, its season is shorter, which definitely makes it seem less of a chore to get through because you're not bombarded with as many episodes. And thirdly, I actually like the characters better because you have a regular group of characters who are have a certain chemistry and have different character stories that I think have good chemistry, and you follow them through the season. Whereas Clone Wars, I did kind of like how they focused on different aspects, different characters and different aspects of the wars, but especially in the first 3 seasons, I found most of the plots really tedious and just ooh, there's a battle here, and ooh, here's a battle there, and there's a battle over there, and I know how the war ends, and it ends with the battles being pretty much meaningless, so it kind of was really boring to me, or really tedious. And it wasn't until I think the later seasons, they started to in season 3 and then got better in season 4 and 5 and definitely 6 and 7 and making it more interesting. But the first 2 seasons, especially the first one actually, I think was a really, really slog to get through. Whereas Rebels, alright, so right away I noticed it's a lot, especially after coming off of season 7 of Clone Wars, that this one's a lot more geared towards kids. It feels more like an action cartoon show that would be geared towards 12-year-olds or 13-year-olds, maybe even younger. It kind of reminds me maybe of Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, or maybe a bit more mature than that, but in that same sort of a goofy cast of characters that have these interactions. In fact, it reminded me of a stereotypical sci-fi show. Here's this ragtag crew of mischiefs, and there's the guy who likes guns, there's the brave leader, and then there's it reminded me actually a lot of Firefly, which I don't think, by the way, is as great as many people do say, although I'd still like it, but to me it falls in that trap of here's your stereotypical crew. Now, so I'm glad to hear that the show improves in its 3rd and 4th seasons, because it's not that much of a premise here, but it was a lot more enjoyable than I thought it was. For the most part, I thought this was a decent season. As I said, it wasn't. I was thankful it was only 14 episodes, or 15 if you count the first one as a 2-parter, because it was easier to get through. But it wasn't. I definitely enjoyed it more than I did the first 2 seasons. I would dare say the first 3 seasons of the Clone Wars. So let's go ahead and get started with the episodes, starting with the first episode, Spark. of the rebellion. This is the two-parter that begins the series, and I think it's a pretty effective two-parter. It is, of course, as I said, a bit childish and cartoonish, but it gets across its point. I think it works very well. The Ezra character comes off as Aladdin in this episode. It does seem like they're modeling a lot of this off of Aladdin, like a street rat who doesn't obey the rules. And I mean, it's to be fair, it's the type of characters very commonly seen in lots of cartoons. And I think as the show progresses, they do more interesting things with him and distinguish him a bit more. But in this episode in particular, he comes off as the cliche that you've seen a dozen times before. But then again, as I said, it kind of works for a pilot episode, introducing the characters, and it's a good story, a good way to introduce him into the crew, who particularly the Zeb character, who doesn't want him there, but you find that Hera, the captain of the ship, kind of encourages keeping him around, and eventually that rubs off on Kanan, particularly when he recognizes that Ezra has Force abilities. And so they say, oh, well, so he agrees to just go on one mission to save the Wookiees, but he is, of course, very helpful, and then kind of bonds with the crew a bit, and then agrees to stay. And so, yeah, it was good. It was, not great or anything, but it worked as a pilot episode, the way to start the show. And introduce the characters, and I kind of do like Chopper, the droid with an attitude. Like, you think R2-D2 had an attitude? Oh my God, nowhere near Chopper's attitude. But anyway, speaking of droids, we'll get to the next episode, Droids in Distress. Speaking of R2-D2, he makes his mandatory appearance in every single Star Wars property. Him and C-3PO always have to show up. I kind of like C-3PO's obtuseness, where he thinks he's just working for the Empire and helping this, what's-her-face Imperial lady translate. And really, R2-D2 is sent to, make sure that the Empire doesn't receive these weapons, of course, Kanan and his band of rebels have their own plans to interfere, and I kind of like it how Chopper has this huge incident and is a huge asshole to Ezra, and at first I was like, why? This is a bit too much for him, but then of course they reveal it's part of the plan to get all the droids kicked out of the area, which will force Sabine to translate, and she of course fails to translate correctly on purpose to mislead them to go to the wrong cargo hold, so her group can get to the guns first. And they end up taking R2-D2 and C-3PO with them. And C-3PO again is being super obtuse, and he even calls the Empire. That might have been a bit too much for me, but whatever. But R2-D2, of course, knows what's up, and he still helps the rebels, and they manage to destroy all the guns so that the Empire doesn't get them. And then we get, big cameo from Senator Organa. And he, tells R2-D2, is like, tell me about these rebels. It's very interesting, setting up for a bigger sort of, actually kind of sets up for towards the end of the season, because most of the rebels, other than Hera and Kanan, are pretty unaware of the greater rebellion at hand. They just know they're their own tiny little group, which is a pretty interesting setup, I think. And I actually find it one of the other reasons I forgot to mention at the top of the video why I found this more interesting than the Clone Wars is because it is set during the original trilogy rather than during the prequels, because of course I like the original trilogy much better. And I think I noticed how the style of the show is very much more within the original trilogy. Like the music in particular reminds me they use a lot of, and I'm not talking about all the recognizable tunes from the original trilogy, but some of the lesser music, just the background action music that was in mainly just A New Hope, are reused here, and it gives it more of that feel, which I do appreciate. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is Fight or Flight. This episode was okay. It's all about Zeb and Ezra bonding, and they go to the market, and Hera's like, hey, get this fruit that they can't possibly get, and that leads to them almost getting like killed by the Empire. So maybe she should be a bit more careful than that, or maybe they should realize that not to listen to her bullshit. But it all ends up in them stealing a fighter, and I don't know. This episode is a bit silly. It's okay. I kind of like it, but it is kind of silly how they just roaming on this fighter, and when they call the ship, they're like, what is that? Where are you guys? And they're like, we kind of stole a fighter, and they're like, well, you disabled the locator beacon, right? And I was like, yeah, of course we did that. Now how do you do that again? He was like, it's cut the both wires. I'm like, yeah, I did. I did that a long time ago when we first got it. Like, that was kind of fun. And like, again, I like the chemistry between the crew, but then they go rescue some random guy that Ezra knew, and it's kind of a mediocre plot or whatever. It does show, of course, how the Empire is bullying the regular citizen, which of course is a very important thing to establish. Not that we didn't already know that the Empire was bad, but still, it's good to establish that in this show in particular. Alright, so next episode is Rise of the Old Masters, and this is a pretty interesting episode. It's pretty average in its plot. They go to rescue someone, a Jedi, from a prison, but it turns out to be a trap. It's a trap! I guess I haven't met Admiral Akbar yet. He wasn't able to warn them. But, so, it's interesting because it gets into Ezra and Kanan's relationship, and Kanan's reluctance to train Ezra, and how that has a lot more to do with his self-doubt. He doesn't think he's capable. Ezra interprets that as Kanan not having low faith in Ezra, and thinking that Kanan thinks that Ezra isn't capable, which is an interesting dynamic because, of course, they're trying to rescue this Jedi Master, I think is the one that trained Kanan, and so he's just like, she'll train you, don't worry, once we rescue her, she'll be your guy, she'll be your trainer, and Ezra's like, I don't want her, I want you, and he's like, no, I'm not good enough, you gotta have her. And it is interesting, that dynamic between the two characters, and the reluctance. I think it makes them more interesting, that it's not instantly like, oh, you're a Jedi, I'm going to train you to be a Jedi. That there's this uncertainty and trepidation, and a lot having to do with the fact that the Jedi aren't really around. Now, I have come to accept that there are Jedi in this time period, which I think actually goes against the intentions of the original trilogy and the New Hope, like Obi-Wan Kenobi saying the Jedi are wiped out, that they all died in the Clone Wars, and throughout the original trilogy they refer to Luke as the only Jedi, the only hope. But you know what? It's more interesting this way to have more Jedi, so I'm willing to forgive this retcon, even though it's obviously a retcon that doesn't fit, but it's more interesting this way, so go ahead. I'll roll with it. But, and I've kind of already accepted this, and with Ahsoka being in Mandalorian and stuff like that. But anyway, I'm accepting it more now, actually seeing the source material. But anyway, so yeah, so I thought that was a very interesting. It actually kind of scared the hell out of me when they went to rescue the Jedi, and she was sitting there in a cell, but kind of just crawled back into her tomb and went back into her dead body. It was just like an illusion, I guess, maybe a hologram or maybe something, a Sith trick that the Inquisitor was doing. And the Inquisitor, very, very good villain, very freaky villain, very effective. Like the first couple episodes had that one blonde dude with the beard. I'm like, I'm not scared of him. Like, he's not a very intimidating villain. He's kind of like a goofball that they're easy to defeat. And it does seem like in the first couple episodes they do try to play him off like he's a badass villain. I'm like, no, he's not. But the Inquisitor is, and every time, especially this time when they encounter them, like, you feel like they're lucky to get out with their lives, particularly in this episode that they barely escape. So it was not easy, a real inconvenience. Anyway, so yeah, so I did like that. Let's get into the next episode, which is Breaking Ranks. Like, there's no episode that I really hate this season, but this one, I don't know. I just don't like dealing with cadets. I think it's kind of boring. So Ezra goes undercover as a stormtrooper cadet, and they're doing these like freaky games where they have to climb out of a pit with all the things, and they're competing with each other. And it reminds me of a very poor version of Ender's Game, and I don't know. I didn't really. And he met up with this other person who had a reason to hate the Empire, and he's teaming up with them but staying with the Empire, so he's going to be undercover. He ends, makes an appearance later in the season, and this other dude that he escapes with them because they became friends or whatever. I don't know. I just did not find this episode very interesting. I just don't like cadets. I think it's kind of dumb. I was like, whatever. I was kind of waiting for it to be over, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Anyway, next episode is Out of Darkness. This episode is pretty decent. Apparently, it's on IMDb. It's one of the lowest rated episodes of the show. I didn't think it was that bad. I thought it's fine. So Hera and Sabine get trapped on this planet because, and I kind of like this, because fucking Chopper and Ezra and Zeb were like too busy arguing with each other and didn't fix the ship properly. I kind of like that. I like that vulnerability of these rebels, that they're not well organized and that they come into trouble because they just fuck up like that. But anyway, yeah, so they're trapped on this planet with these like creatures that are like really scary, like beasts that can only come out in the darkness, like the sunlight hurts them. But they're only like an asteroid, and there's all these asteroids floating around, and there's this giant one that's about to block out the sun, so they're like doomed. So they have to come up with this plan to set off all these explosives to try to stop them, and there's so many of them, they only manage to slow them down. But then of course the ship shows up at the last second to save them. But yeah, I thought it was a pretty intense, pretty scary episode. So I don't see why this would be so low rated. It was decent enough for me. Anyway, next episode is Empire Day, and I did find the whole concept of Empire Day dumb, and that they had to, they're setting off these fireworks to try to disrupt the Empire Day. I'm like, I really don't care. And something about Ezra's backstory was like, oh, Empire Day makes me sad. And it dealt with his backstory with his parents. I don't know why, but I was just really disinterested in it, and I just didn't care about it. But The episode does get better towards the end because it ties in. It gets pretty exciting when they meet this character who has all these codes from the Empire, so he could do a lot of damage, and apparently was an old family friend of Ezra's parents, and apparently Ezra is kind of blaming him for his parents' death. So that was interesting. And it ended on a cliffhanger that was really suspenseful. So started out kind of poorly, but it got better. So it's a decent episode. So then let's get to the next episode, which is Gathering Forces. An episode I really liked that dealt with the conclusion because the Inquisitor had put a tracker on the Ghost, and so they're tracking them through light speed, and they figured this out, which I thought was, as there was a high tension where you see like Inquisitor and that other dude like tracking them, and then you go to the ship and they seem oblivious, like, oh yeah, we're gonna go do this thing, and I was like, no, they're tracking you, but they figure it out. And it was like, oh, thank God. But they don't really have a way around it except for, sending off the smaller ship as a diversion. And they're sending Ezra and Kanan with them because they're force sensitive and the Inquisitor can sense them. So if they stay on the ship, they'll be able to sense that something's off. And I like the callback because they end up going back to that planet with the scary beast that can only come out in the dark. But then it's also a callback because Kanan in the previous episode was trying to train Ezra to to control animals and whatnot, and so they come back with the intention of trying to train, can use their force abilities to control the animals to attack the Inquisitor. So that when the Inquisitor does show up, they use the beasts in order to attack him, which I thought was pretty fucking intense. I like that. I was like, oh wow, because those things are so scary from the previous episode, and now we see them like going after the stormtroopers and fucking them up, and just like Ezra and Kanan just sitting there like doing their Jedi things and with their eyes closed and holding their hands up, and that was cool. But then the Inquisitor, of course, he's more skilled, so he was able to defeat the beasts, and he almost gets the better of Kanan. And that is until Ezra, freaks the fuck out and summons this gigantic beast from below. It's like the Balrog version of these things. And that thing fucks up the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor is barely able to escape that thing, which I thought that was super intense. Now they were playing this off like Ezra was like, oh my God, don't, like Kanan was so scared of the fact that he did it, and they thought he was leaning more to the dark side by doing this. But I was like, I didn't really get that. I mean, he needed to save you from the Inquisitor, and that's what he did. I don't see the issue, but anyway, really like that. And again, the Inquisitor is a very scary dude, and is very intimidating. Whenever they escape him, I feel like, wow, they barely managed to do that. Now, I think I'll talk a bit more about him later. So anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Path of the Jedi. I thought this was a pretty interesting episode. So they find the Jedi Temple on the planet they're on, and just so happens to be there coincidentally, but whatever. And it took me a while to realize that they just stay on the same planet throughout the whole season. And I'm like, I know they go on some adventures and whatnot, but it's basically their home base is Ezra's home world. And I was like, oh, I thought they would just go to different places and not just stay there the whole time. But whatever. Anyway, so they happens to be a Jedi temple there, and they go in, and we get a Yoda cameo where Yoda is essence. I wouldn't say ghost because he's actually still alive at this point. So that could be him, or it could be like a version of him or whatever, because we know he's on Dagobah, just chilling. But anyway, he could be using force projection to be in this other planet. But he's guides Ezra, and of course Ezra has this vision that the Inquisitor shows up and kills Kanan the whole time. I'm like, yeah, this is a Jedi vision. It's not really happening, and of course that's the case. Meanwhile, Kanan's like waiting, and apparently there's like dead bodies who waited too long, waited for the Padawans to get back and never came back. I'm like, well, I don't know. That just seems a bit silly, but they wanted to create stakes, so whatever. Yeah, I thought this was a great character story for Ezra and Kanan. It helped develop them further in their Jedi things, and I love the Yoda's teaching and his. I know it was a previous episode where Kanan was like, "There is no try," and Ezra was like, "What does that even mean?" And I love that because I always thought that saying didn't make any fucking sense, and Kanan's just like, "I don't know, it's just something Yoda says," which I thought was great. But I like Yoda's appearance here and the training that he gives them. It felt very Jedi-like, so it really helped contribute to the feel of them as Jedi. So I did like this episode. So next episode is Idiots of Rey, where we get the cameo from Lando. I mean, so this is set during the original Star Wars time, and it allows for a lot more of these legacy well-known characters to just pop up, and of course it's cartoons, so they don't have to rely on the actors who are much older. Now they can just draw them and get some other guy to imitate the characters, and there you go, voila, you got Lando. And I like the idea of Lando showing up, and I like the way he's portrayed. I think it's kind of consistent with the kind of scumbag he is, but the actual plot of the episode is silly. It does come off as really cartoonish. And I also don't buy where he's like, they go to the ship, and Lando's like, says to Hera and Kanan, "Oh, whatever I say, just follow my lead, just go with me." And then, he basically says, "Oh, I want to sell, the slave, which is Hera, to this guy for this thing." And I'm like, yeah. And of course, Kanan didn't want to go with it. He kept fighting. He's like, "No, we're not going to go along with this." But Hera does. But then, she gets an escape pod, and she has to do a lot of, work. She has to, kick the guy's ass and fight off all these other people in order to get off the ship. And what does she gain out of it? Just so Lando can get his, pig? And she's obviously pissed off with him about it, but why did she even agree to go along with it in the first place? I don't know. And the whole thing with the pig, turned to a puffer thing, and it was, blocking the area, and, when Ezra tried to climb on it, it got bigger and, pushed Zeb against the controls, and the Empire spotted them. That was all a bit silly. And then, of course, they ended up, conning Lando, and because, and taking the, what did they do? Oh, they just stole his energy. Chopper stole his energy source, but apparently he knew that they did that, which is why he didn't pay them. But, according to them, he still owes them one. So they consider that he still owes them for their services. But anyway, yeah. And of course, he does his womanizing thing with Sabine, which is what really pisses off Ezra, which is kind of true to his character, but still, it was fine. It was okay. It was cool seeing Lando. Anyway, next episode is Vision of Hope, that dealt with, there's this senator who would feature throughout the season as someone being this voice on the radio saying, "I'm the voice for resistance, and the Empire has gone too far, and we need to stand up." And he's supposed to interrupt official broadcasts and do his pirate broadcast, and then they have to go and save him. because he wants to meet with them, and it turns out that he's a spy working for the Empire. I mean, I guess that's kind of interesting. I don't know. There's something about this whole episode I found kind of boring. Particularly with them just running from the Empire for most of the episode, and then you find out, oh no, he's a traitor, and that's it. I don't know. Felt kind of typical. Anyway, next episode is called Call to Action, which kicks off a three-parter that ends the season, and I really, really like these episodes. I like this episode. I thought it was pretty powerful, because they decided to take a hint from even though that guy was ended up being an imposter, ended up being working for the Empire, he still had a good idea of and Ezra and Kanan got the idea. I was like, well, why don't we do that for real? Why don't we be a real voice to expose the Empire's secrets and try to get people on our side? And so they decide to attack this communications tower. And but unbeknownst to us, Grand Moff Tarkin has showed up on this planet, and he's like had enough of these rebels and saying how everyone there has failed, like the dude with the beard, and like there's these goofy Imperial soldiers we've seen throughout the season. Tarkin just like chops their fucking heads off, or has the Inquisitor do it, which is pretty. It shows how serious this fucker is. And so it did raise the stakes, and it was a high tension because you knew going into this attack that they were doing on this communications tower that it was again a trap, that they knew that they were coming, and that they were sitting there waiting for them, and sure enough they managed to spring the trap, and Kanan has to sacrifice himself in order for the others to get away, which was super, super intense. So then we get into the next episode, which follows off this one, Rebel Resolve, where Kanan is being held and tortured by the Inquisitor. Very dark shit. And I love how they had that mind-proby droid that we saw in A New Hope, that floating floating ball with syringes sticking out of it. So anyway, while this is happening, Hera is ordered by her contact, mysterious contact that she refuses to tell Sabine about, that was pissing her off, that to abandon Kanan and not try to rescue him because it's too impossible, and they can't risk their own group over one person. And of course Ezra's very much against this, and I love how Hera's like, well, he made a decision to sacrifice himself to save us, and we need to respect that, which is a pretty good argument, and I definitely see where she's coming from. But do the others listen to her? Of course not. And I kind of like how they because at first I thought it was just Ezra and Chopper, but then I find out that Sabine was in on it, and Zeb, of course, learns about it and goes in on it with them, that they all decide to ditch her and trick her. And I like how Chopper does it by like purposely fucking up. Chopper is funny. And so they go off to meet their contact to try to get with any information, and Ezra reveals he's a Jedi, and promises to do this contact a favor, which I'm sure will come back to haunt him for any information. So he gives them information about these certain type of droids that they're using, courier droids that they're using to communicate, since their communication tower is down, because they decided to destroy the thing as soon as Ezra and Kanan's signal was broadcasting. So they Hera meets up with them, and she's pissed, but they convince her to go along with the plan. And so they send Chopper in disguised as one of these courier droids, which I thought was pretty funny. But they manage to get the information that they need and head off to rescue Kanan. And yeah, so that's pretty much where this episode ends. Was I liked it. Again, really good episode. Pretty intense. Great character stories. Yeah. So then we go into the big finale, Fire Across the Galaxy. So this is when they arrive. They want to rescue Kanan, but they need like a TIE fighter, and there's like they attack this base. Like the whole episode, it begins with them attacking this base and destroying all these TIE fighters, and they're like, we probably should have saved one of them so we could take it with us. But then they're like, Ezra reveals that they had that TIE fighter they stole in the earlier episode that was still around. They didn't destroy it like they said they did, which I knew they didn't, but I didn't know that they were just hiding it. And apparently Sabine was like painting it, and so it looks all colorful. I kind of love that, and they're like, oh, they won't even notice until it's too close and they're too late. So they decide to take this like colorful painted TIE fighter with them, which I thought was pretty cool, on a rescue mission. And then Ezra makes contact with Kanan, and they can tell that he's still alive. And so they successfully infiltrate Tarkin's ship, which it does seem like they shouldn't have been able to pull this off, but whatever. It is very hard for them. They are attacked by lots of stormtroopers at first, but then because they managed to like disable them, all the stormtroopers on board, but then more stormtroopers come and they get surrounded. And moreover, like when Ezra tries to get to Kanan, he's being guarded by the Inquisitor, and the huge battle breaks out between the Inquisitor and Kanan. And again, like you always feel when the Inquisitor shows up that they're fucked, and it's going to be really, really hard to get out of it. This situation, it is a really grand lightsaber battle that does last a bit. You have Ezra has his new personally built lightsaber, which is doubles for a blaster, which I'm a bit iffy about that concept when it was first introduced. You need to have a blaster and a lightsaber in the same weapon. I don't know. It's kind of practical the way they use it in this episode, but it seems just cheesy in principle, but whatever. So they had a grand battle to fight off the Inquisitor, and they actually end up killing him, which surprised me. Now, I knew going into, before I watched this season, that from the trailers from the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, which has not come out yet, as I record this, that they're going to have the Inquisitor in that show. And I knew, like, I saw YouTube videos and stuff saying, oh, it's the guy from Rebels, and they showed like a side-by-side picture of him in Rebels and him in Kenobi. And so I was like, oh, so when he showed up in this show, when I saw him here, I was like, oh yeah, it's the guy from the trailers, the Kenobi that's going to be in Kenobi. But I didn't expect him to die in the first season. I thought he would be a more important character, especially how freaking scary and intimidating he was. But judging by the ending of this episode, they may have ditched him in favor of Darth Vader. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing him in the Kenobi. He was a really scary dude. And I think maybe they did kill him off a bit too early by killing him off in this episode. But yeah, it was an intense episode, and they got out the skin of their teeth, and Chopper apparently was, running the ship, and he wasn't there to pick him up, and they thought they were going to get stranded and die. But then Chopper shows up with a whole bunch of friends because he had the mysterious contact of Hera, which turns out to be Ahsoka Tano. Now, I knew going in that Ahsoka would be in the show because I saw clips and stuff. I was made aware that she was in Rebels. I mentioned this in my review for Clone Wars Season 7, which was made after Rebels finished. So at this stage, they don't even know how she survived Order 66. They just assume that she did. But anyway, So, or at least the audience when this was first made up. But anyway, I should have realized that this mysterious person was Ahsoka. It didn't even occur to me. And when she showed up, I'm like, oh, of course. Like, why didn't I put this together? Obviously, it's Ahsoka. Now, I don't know at this stage, and don't tell me, I don't want to be spoiled, but I don't know how much she will feature in the next couple of seasons, if she's going to become like a main cast or a main recurring cast. I'm not sure, but I would like that. I think that would be very interesting, and of course it leaves the season on a really tantalizing cliffhanger. I'm really curious to see where they go with this, and not only that, of course, the cell now knows they're part of a bigger group, and I do love how like Zeb and Ezra and Sabine were like didn't even know they were a part. There was a part of a bigger rebellion. They didn't know anything existed outside of their one little cell. And they're like, "Oh, we're a cell? I didn't even know that." And so it's going to be interesting now that the world is being widened and the bigger picture is coming into fruition. So yeah, powerful finale that I really loved. So that is it for all the episodes of Season 1 of Star Wars Rebels. So as always, I'll name my favorite and least favorite episode of the season. Now, as I said, for the most part, most of these episodes were good. They're average good episodes. So it's hard to pick out bad or good ones or great ones. But I will say for worst episode, the runner-up is Vision of Hope, the one with that, senator dude who turned out to be a spy. But as for my worst episode of the season, it's going to be Breaking Ranks, the one with the cadets, which, it's not actually a terrible episode. It's not the worst thing in the world. I just don't like it. I just don't find it interesting to have this thing with cadets playing these tests and trying to jump out of these things to win the test to get the thing, and I don't know. And I didn't really buy the other kid's motivation, something about his sister. I don't know. Anyway. As for my favorite episode of the season, the best episode of the season, a bit more runners-up, you got Gathering Forces, which I thought was the cool conclusion where Ezra and Kanan use like this beast to attack the Inquisitor. Call to action. The first part in the three-parter where they attack the communications tower and it goes wrong. Rebel Resolve. The next part where Ezra sneaks behind Hera's back, but then eventually convinces her to go rescue Kanan. But as for the best episode of the season, I will have to say it is the finale, Fire Across the Galaxy. Super intense episode. As I said, the Inquisitor is a great villain. I'm kind of disappointed that he's gone already. But every time he shows up, you really think that they're fucked. You thought it would be super impossible for them to get out of such a hard situation, but actually it was super easy, barely an inconvenience, because they just had a funny painted TIE fighter, and Chopper then shows up with Ahsoka. So, yeah, really exciting ending. My favorite episode of the season. So my rating for Star Wars Rebels Season 1 out of 10 is going to be a 7. Very good. Very decent season. Very good season. I thought it was a good start for this show. Of course, it was a bit silly and definitely aimed at kids. So I don't think it's any better than a 7. It didn't rise above that overall for me. But overall, I was quite happy with the season. So yeah, I'm definitely interested to see more. So that is it for my review of Star Wars Rebels Season 1. I shall return next month to cover Season 2 of Rebels. So be sure to check out my channel for that. Also check out my channel as I cover many more shows like all things Star Trek, particularly Star Trek New Worlds, Strange New Worlds, which will be coming out shortly, and other shows like The Expanse, Better Call Saul, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that, and thanks a lot for watching.